This is Pace Per Mile with host Chris Nicholas. Take us on your next run or ride and prepare for race day with Pace Per Mile.
Welcome back to Pace Per Mile. It's our weekly training segment this week, and we're talking with Jake Maulin and Alyx Ulbrich. And Jake and Alyx, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about resolutions. Last week, we talked about exercises that people could do. I'm looking out the window right now here in the studio, and it's snowing again. But we still need to stay active. And hopefully each week, our listeners will take a little bit of information that the two of you talk about and can take that and really implement it into their exercise routine, getting ready for their next 5K, 10K, maybe marathon in the fall. So welcome back again to Pace Per Mile, you two.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And Jake and Alyx, we want to talk now a little bit more in depth about actual goal setting. I think it's important for our listeners to, as you had told me off the air, Jake, that they should be setting goals. And I would assume my next statement is that they should be setting realistic goals, or should they be setting goals that are maybe unreachable?
I sort of have a goal formula, and one piece of that is there should be some doubt in your mind if you can complete the goal or not. So like if you want to take an example of a half marathon, I think it's a good thing if somebody goes, I don't know if I can do that. I think because a big part of goal setting is that breakthrough moment when you have that sense of achievement and you have that empowerment of doing something that you maybe didn't think you could do.
Alyx, what's your thoughts on that?
I don't even really like to think of the idea that there's a person out there that thinks there's something they can achieve, but I know from the clients I have that unfortunately that is the case, and that's part of the job of being a trainer, is to help somebody find the belief in themselves and invest the time in order to make all goals of feasibility. But I absolutely do agree. I think it's important to set practical goals as well as longer term, little scarier goals. I think when we step outside of our comfort zone, that's when we grow.
Are we setting goals in everything that we do when it comes to exercise, though? Or have you ever seen that person walk into the gym, or you probably have not let them go too long without setting a goal? But what happens to the individuals that don't set goals, the ones that are like, you know what, I'm just going to the gym? I guess that's a goal, but there has to be that further or that more achievable goal or that target in range.
You know, those people quit. Those are the ones that sign up to the gym January 1st, and usually they're already gone.
The staying power of people that don't commit themselves to something, especially as we had already talked about in the long term, because of their lack of commitment, they usually don't stick around. And another thing that I find, and I'll play on that, if somebody comes into my office and sits down, I'll say, do you have any goals? What do you want to get out of this? What are your expectations of me and the fitness level we're going to take you to? And if they say, I don't have any, or I don't have any goals, I'm like, that's perfect. Then you can become whoever you want. And then we start a journey, and I find within a matter of weeks, they find out if they like running or not. They find out if they like cycling or not. They find out what they're really passionate about. And then a few more weeks after that, that's when they're like, hey, I read about a Century Club on a bike, and I think that's something I'd really like to do. Or maybe I can do a half marathon or something like that, because they want to apply the work that we do together to obtaining a medal.
Now, Alyx, do you take that same approach, or is it a little bit different for you when you sit down with your clients?
Somebody doesn't have a goal, or they don't have at least an idea, even if it's a simple goal, I want to lose 5 pounds. If they don't have, in all honesty, the boldness to state a goal the first day we meet, I pass on them as a client. I'll usually hand them to another trainer who maybe is a little more patient. I like people who aren't scared to say they plan to do something with their life, whether it's a year from now, 6 weeks from now, or in 2 days. If they're not bold enough to make that first jump, I usually don't like to do the hand-holding required to get there.
When we're talking about setting a goal, we talked in the past about losing weight, but is it realistically that high of a goal that they're setting when they're talking to you, Alyx? Or is there a step-up process? Is there a plateau that we have to meet and then another plateau, etc.?
It's important to set small goals, like to show up to the gym 3 times a week. Could be nothing outside of that, but I think it's important to reassess often. For myself and my clients, I like to recommend a monthly goal because I feel like a month is a appropriate amount of time in which you can expect to progress, make change, make commitments. So it could be, I'm going to give up soda this month. Next month, it could be, I'm going to show up to the gym because I've been paying for that membership. It can be baby steps, but it has to be consistent steps, or people tend to give up and lose direction.
I also would dial it down to the day or even the session. When a client comes to see me, every session, I don't care if I've been seeing them for a couple of years or the first session, every session I tell them, this is what I hope to accomplish with you today. And oftentimes it's based on what I've seen them do, what I think they can do. And they usually get a little bit of an ego boost when they do successfully do 2,000 meters on a row machine, keeping it at a solid pace of 2 minutes and 30 seconds per 500 meters, or when they do complete a 12-minute German interval cycle bike. And they get that sort of power pulse in a day at a time. And I also find that that builds into your monthly goal, which builds into your big goal. There's an old quote out there when it comes to marksmanships, and that is aim small, miss small. So I find if you dial it down into the session, it certainly compounds into a really great achievement.
Alyx, do you believe that it's better to set the bar way high or realistically?
I like to set the bar way high and then backtrack to find the steps that we're going to take to get there. I think if people set the bar realistically and that's it, they don't pick a bigger goal per se, it's easy to push off. Oh, well, I didn't lose 2 pounds this month, so I'll just do that next month. I can do it later. If they realize that losing 2 pounds this month is a bigger part of losing the 50 pounds they promised themselves they would lose in a year, that goal has a little more motivation behind it. So I think it's important to set the big goals first, even if they're scary to say, and then outline a plan A, B, and C to get themselves there.
Another bit of conversation that I have with a potential client or a current client is I will ask them, let's just stick with the running example. Do you think you can run a 5K tomorrow? And if the answer is yes, then I'll say, do you think you could do a 5-miler tomorrow? And if the answer is yes, and we'll keep going all the way up until do you think you can run a half marathon tomorrow? And if they say no, I'll say, that's great. So that's going to be your goal as a runner. And we're going to schedule different 5Ks and 10Ks that you can do as building blocks along the way to get you race ready for your big 13.1 mile Everest.
But I think we have to separate a goal down into the mental side of it and the physical side of it, because we could be doing great physically, but does that really relate to the mental side or vice versa?
I do, and I do play on self-doubt quite a bit. Oftentimes people come to me when they're not feeling good about themselves. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people find their way into gyms and fitness centers is because they're looking to fill a hole. And I always talk about using fitness as a wonderful arena to build esteem. And so when these people come to me and they're looking to do something, I give them the opportunity to break through a limitation that they had set on themselves. Though there may be some controversy behind this, but I really believe that anybody can run a half of a marathon. And I'll even go so far as to say most people can run a marathon. It's just we put preconceived limitations on what we think we can do and what we sell ourselves. We believe what we want to believe. And once you start that sort of flywheel effect going of miles and time on your feet and accomplishment and ego strength, it really can turn into quite a monster. I've seen a lot of people that wanted nothing to do with running turn into real serious marathon runners. And it's kind of funny to shoot them a remember when every now and again. And it's a lot of fun to see happen to somebody.
Physically, I think the general human is capable of doing so. I don't necessarily set everybody to a marathon goal. I do yearly do a few Spartan races with my clients, and whether they want to or not, at some point annually, I buy a race entry for them and they do it. And it's really a fun, empowering sense for maybe a 60-year-old woman who's never done any athletic sport in her life, realize that not only is she a competitor, not only did she maybe place in her age division, but she conquered anywhere from a 3 to 12 mile obstacle course run. And I think for people to achieve things athletically that maybe they didn't even have the guts to say they were going to do is a really empowering day for them.
Not everybody achieves their goal. And I hate to be the naysayer here, but what happens when they don't achieve that goal? What happens to them mentally at that point?
I had to face that not too long ago. I was doing an ultra marathon that I ended up getting injured at, and I didn't get to complete. And that was the first time I had a did not finish or a fail short of maybe a set time I had in my head. I really hadn't planned for plan B of not being able to finish. My plan B was doing it slower. And it took a little time to reset and a little perspective that, hey, maybe I didn't reach that goal, but how much further did I come in the process of training for it? I think there's a saying, it's something about shoot for the stars, and even if you miss, you'll land in the sky. So go big, and if you don't get there, that's okay. Look at where you've come, regroup, and move on. Pick a different goal.
Pardon the cliche, but it is part of the journey. And if you have a client and their goal is to run a marathon and they don't accomplish that goal, there can be some mental damage done to that person and that esteem. And what I do find is when I talk to people about the way that they feel about their performance or lack thereof, ultimately what we drive it to is you chalk it up as experience. And again, this may sound a little fruity, but if you didn't finish the race, then you weren't meant to finish the race that day. And you're meant to use that experience to fuel your further running and perhaps inspire others to get behind you.
What I'm taking from the two of you then is maybe when we set that goal to run, let's say we're going to run the Houston Marathon. It was 6 months ago that we planned to do that, or a year ago that we planned to do that. But we should have a fallback goal then, or goals.
Not necessarily a fallback goal at that point. I think when you set a goal, it's important to go after it 110%. Like your dinner on the table depends on it. But I also think it's important to have goals to help you get there. So maybe if you set a goal to run a marathon 6 months out, you tell yourself 3 months in, you should be able to run a half marathon. And maybe 3 months in, you've had a sprained ankle and it's been a cold winter and you realize you go out and you're huffing and puffing at 6 miles and that's it. So then at that point you reset. I'm still going to run that marathon, but here's my training plan. Or maybe I'm not going to run that marathon in the set amount of time, but I'm going to finish it. So I think it's important to go after the goal and make adjustments to the goal as necessary. But I think it's important to put a sense of urgency and to really strive for that. You know, there's something to be said for achieving a goal and the satisfaction and empowerment that comes with it, and to not fully go after it or to only half-heartedly attempt knowing you have a fallback, then that takes away from your chance at completing it.
I discourage people from sort of having that fallback plan as well for a lot of the same reasons. But I also find that people who pick these goals, it's important to understand why we're doing these goals, what we expect to get from this accomplishment. And oftentimes, if you got somebody that's coming up to race day and it may look like it's not happening, I ask them before, almost as an element of damage control for the psyche, why are we doing this? And we'll start to talk about it a little bit. And then maybe it is in their best interest to wait it out. A friend of mine, being here in Boston, his goal was to go sub 3 in the Boston Marathon. And it was the year that it was really hot. I think this was 2 years ago. It was really hot. It was close to 90 degrees. And he decided to waive because they gave the opportunity to people who wanted to waive until the next year. And he ran it in sub 3 hours the next year. And dare I say, no big deal, but he accomplished his goal and he did it in a reasonable fashion.
We're in winter right now. We're not running as many races. We're probably always looking for more races to pop up in the wintertime. At least that's my opinion, because there's that opportunity out there to fill a weekend and hit a Saturday or Sunday morning and race. But does that create then different goals for different seasons in the sense, or different parts of the year?
Absolutely. For myself, at least, and my clients.
We sort of touched on this in our last segment on things that you do in the wintertime for your running and your sports performance that you don't really do when the season is in high gear. You know, I tend to lift a lot more in the wintertime. One, a lot of training logs call for it, and it's kind of a chicken and the egg kind of a thing. Like, what came first? Were we lifting weights in the wintertime because we couldn't get outside, or was it deemed that that's when you're at your best to strength train for future competition? In the wintertime, I usually have more weightlifting, strength, and conditioning goals, and in the summertime, I'm honing in on my Ironman competitions, and I'm honing in on my ultra marathons and marathon times.
Our audience for Pace Per Mile tends to be runners that are running every day. They're signing up for races. We obviously get some new listeners that are just getting into the sport. But let's touch on that person that really is new to running or endurance sports. Is there a first goal that you always think of when they sit down in front of you, Alyx?
I think that everybody should have the goal of being involved in a race in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's going and volunteering for the day, whether it's cheering a spouse or a friend on, whether it's going to a local run hosted by your run store that's not necessarily a sanctioned run. I think just getting out and finding the community that there is in these sports is a great way to get your feet wet, even if it doesn't mean performing the very first time.
I had never thought of it like that until Alyx just said that. I don't think I've ever suggested somebody go out and get their feet wet or get involved with the running community, but I have found that the running community are really some of the best people on the planet. When I first ran a marathon, I wanted to do it. And sometimes people ask me today, why I still run so many marathons. And one of the reasons is because I really like being around that running community and that camaraderie. And there's an individual achievement there, but we are in this thing together. A big thing that comes to mind right off the bat is the old 5K. I think that there's a lot of programs out there, couch to 5K sort of elements. And I also think, and I talked about this in our original segment about getting time on your feet, I suggest people to discover whether they like to run or not by running for an allotted amount of time. I like 10 minutes just to see if it's something that you really enjoy doing and find where your heart is and find your activity in that passion. So for me, the first thing I usually go to is, let's sign you up for a 5K. We'll commit to it. And again, barring any injuries, let's see if we can't get that out of the way so that we can then progress on to whatever the greater distance is.
As we become a better runner, we're running more races out there. We tend to, I think, forget about our goals. Maybe the goal is just signing up for our next race on our bucket list. But for those advanced runners out there, and we know 1, 2, 3, we know running groups in our lives that are filled with them, are there specific goals that you feel that they should be rehashing in their lives?
I do. I think the idea to take somebody who does this often to rehash goals and not just time goals. I know a lot of runners where their goal is to get under a 3-hour marathon, or their goal is to run sub 1 hour and 20 minutes on a half marathon. But I think what's really important is I'm going to dial it back into sort of that day at a time thing. I don't know how many marathons I've run, but we'll call it 20. Maybe the luster of running 26.2 miles is gone for me. However, the training process is still very exciting. And to try and maybe change different training routines, maybe change mileages per week, try new things, and see if maybe you can't discover something about yourself that you didn't know. So I like to offer the advice to the more advanced runner to really take a look at their day-to-day activities, because you're going to put together quite a beautiful story in the end. The training is a process, and again, pardon the cliche, but it is a journey. And you just never know what's going to happen when you commit yourself to a process like training for a race.
I think Jake started to mention it and maybe didn't fully complete the idea. It's definitely about the journey. Myself as an athlete, other athletes I know from my husband to highly elite level professional athletes that I work with, I think we're all so intense in our sports and we run more marathons than we have a certain number for, like Jake, because it's not about that day, although maybe that day is the original catalyst. It's about getting up every morning and being active. It's about having those 2, 3, 10 friends you run with and have coffee with every Saturday. It's about rolling your ankle and realizing you still have the strength to finish out that marathon a month later. It's about having an argument with your spouse, but knowing that that run or that active lifestyle, you can sort it out in your head and come home and be a better person. It's definitely not about the competition, although maybe the competition is a great catalyst. It's definitely about the consistent journey, and having these goals keeps us on that path.
So, Jake, kind of wrap that up from start to finish of setting that goal and your philosophy on that.
I sort of mentioned the formula earlier, but it starts with action, then breakthrough, then empowerment, and then I seal up everybody's goals with responsibility. And I say that people, once accomplish their goal, they have a responsibility to share their experience with friends and family, and maybe they can inspire others to do something great and create a community that's driven opposed to a community that sits back.
I'll do like a weekly thing. Like, you have to post your goals on your Facebook, or don't tell me that you want your spouse to go hiking with you. I want you to invite your spouse out with you because you've been complaining about it to me the last 6 weeks.
That happens a lot.
Yeah, and I challenge people, or I try to challenge people weekly almost, to somehow put themselves out there and to involve other people. It's our responsibility as active people to make sure that we teach our children that, to share it with our friends. And it's okay to be that annoying runner person that always asks people to go run with them.
Jake Maulin, once again, for our followers, our fans, our listeners, they can reach you any time of the day.
I'm usually available. I'm usually pretty good about it. This is my life. I take it very, very serious. And of course, you can always find me at my website, tryjake.com, jake@tryjake.com. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Look up Try Jake or Jake Maulin, and you can certainly get a hold of me by phone, 617-756-6866. Thanks, Chris.
You are welcome. Thank you, by the way. You're very knowledgeable about training, and we are honored to have you here on Pace Per Mile on a weekly basis to help those people out there that really do need it, including myself. So I appreciate that. Alyx, same thing. How can people reach out to you?
I've got a website, alyxluck.com. Again, same as Jake, all the social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Just look me up, Alyx Luck or Alyx Ulbrich. You can find it either way, and I'd love to help you out.
Jake Maulin, Alyx Ulbrich, thank you so much again. You're a wealth of knowledge, and we will be tapping that knowledge throughout the year and into the future here on Pace Per Mile. And thank you, the audience, for reaching out to us. You can do that, info@pacepermile.com. Connect with us on Facebook at facebook.com/Pace Per Mile, and obviously Pace Per Mile on Twitter. For now, keep training out there. Keep setting those goals high. I'm Chris Nicholas.
Thanks for listening to this week's Pace Per Mile show. For more on the latest news, reviews, and more, check out pacepermile.com. Like us on Facebook and join in the conversation on Twitter. Until next week, keep putting in the miles and keep your goals high.